As we think about our experiences at school, most of us have probably encountered violence, whether it's being bullied, witnessing abuse, or being a victim of crime on campus. Violence occurs in some form in just about every school. The problem is pervasive. By a lot of measures, it doesn't really seem to be getting better. Why is this? As a researcher of school violence, I believe that the answer lies in how we're not thinking about the problem. To improve the direction of school violence, we should utilize components of systems thinking. We need to shift from seeing it as a problem of isolated causes to a system of interconnected causes with layers of possible solutions. Let me explain what I mean. Humans have managed to solve a lot of complex problems by thinking about them in layers. Our brains are wired to synthesize basic physical properties of the world into increasingly abstract but highly interconnected layers of objects, actions, and concepts. We layer the processing of sound into melodies, melodies into songs, songs into dancing, and dancing into joy. Our neural systems see patterns within patterns within patterns, forging connections between them to make sense of complex systems of sensory inputs. When we conceptualize systems made from layers, we can see each with their own properties to analyze and change, but also understand their function collectively. And when we think about the education collectively, we often refer to the educational system. So why couldn't we use elements of systems thinking to improve the safety of the educational system? In 1990, an organizational psychologist named James Reason wanted to apply this way of thinking to improve the safety of complex industrial processes. Reason understood that these processes would never function perfectly, but he wanted a way to account for that. He wanted a way to improve the function of these processes in the face of so much malfunction. His solution? Cheese. Swiss cheese specifically. Reason's Swiss cheese model of safety management improves the performance or safety of a system by breaking it down into layers. These layers are all the different components of a system: the machinery, the procedures to operate that machinery, the training processes, the people in charge of all those things. The error-prone layers of all those components are like the holes in slices of cheese. Now, these holes might be individual human errors or mechanical malfunctions that could result in an immediate accident. But they can also be the deeper social and institutional causes motivating those errors in the first place. A system performs because of all of these layers. Now, even though some of those components may have areas that are more error-prone than others, each layer acts like a barrier to mitigate the effects of errors on other layers. Reason's model sees an accident or a catastrophic outcome as the result of a lot of holes aligning across all of these different layers at exactly the right time. So in this way, the more layers we consider in our planning, the higher the level of defense against an accident. And then, in the event of an accident, the model allows for working backward through all of these layers to understand exactly what holes align and exactly what layers to put in place so that accident doesn't happen again. This model of thinking has already made countless industries, from nuclear power to emergency room medicine to transportation, far less risky, less error-prone, and ultimately far safer than they've ever been before. Flying is one area where we've all experienced this model working exactly as it should be. Flying is more technologically advanced than it ever has been before, but it's also far safer than it ever has been before. The chances of dying in a commercial plane crash are around 1 in 3.4 billion. The Swiss cheese approach to safety management has made this possible. Think about it. Aircraft are built with hundreds and hundreds of mechanical systems, each with backup components to backup components, multiple layers of protection against mechanical failure. Pilots regularly train for hundreds of hours how to operate aircraft with multiple systems malfunctioning at once, engines included. Chemicals, but also computers, mitigate the effects of ice and weather, but so do human air traffic controllers monitoring routes and conditions at exactly the same time. Then, in the rare event of an accident, there exists a centralized federal accident investigation board to go backwards through these layers to investigate the immediate and proximate causes. They then translate these findings back through each layer to improve each layer, improve the functioning of the system of flight overall, and prevent that accident from ever happening again. This model serves a process that is incredibly complex, but also incredibly safe. Catastrophic outcomes are rarer than ever, and there exists a well-functioning, highly systematized, and highly layered approach to continue to keep it that way. The same could be and should be true for school violence. Unlike aviation accidents, indicators of school violence are still very common across our society. We see this in students' increasing exposure to dealings with illegal substances, their increased likelihood of committing suicide, their increasing exposure to different types of bullying, and some of the worst forms of school violence, school shootings, have increased in number across all types of schools over the past 20 years. I think it's clear that our current approaches aren't working as well as they could be. And I believe this is because we aren't consistently taking a layered approach, looking at the different layers of causes, but also the multiple layers of possible solutions. Just like flying, keeping schools safe is an incredibly complex undertaking. I want to break this down a little bit more for you to help you to understand exactly how many layers we really need to consider. The first thing to understand is that violence is an end, not a beginning. Violent act does not start on the day that somebody commits it. It starts in the days before, in the weeks before, in the years before, as the holes and layers of personal circumstance align over time. Now, this doesn't mean that anybody with layers and holes of personal circumstance is going to be aligned on a course of bad action. That's not it at all. Just because a sensor fails on a plane being controlled by a tired pilot in a rainstorm doesn't mean that the plane is going to crash. But that's exactly the point. That's exactly how this type of thinking can make a complex process safer. It helps us to see the types of holes that can form, the types of pathways that can open up, but also the layers of intervention that we can put in place to make sure that those malalignments don't come to fruition. So what exactly do these layers look like in a school violence context? There's so many layers and they are so interconnected. For one thing, schools across the country are growing rapidly. More students means more diverse needs that schools need to account for. This diversity takes the form in different individual circumstances of health, socioeconomic conditions, familial circumstances, learning styles and needs. And more diverse students with more diverse needs requires more personnel to vet, hire, train, more facilities to build and maintain and secure. But schools are often chronically under-resourced with staff that are chronically underpaid, leaving students without access to adequate services, often in aging or overcrowded facilities that may not be able to be optimally secure. The layers of personal circumstance at school should prime students for learning and healthy behavior, not frustration or acting out due to unmet needs at school like being hungry, anxious, lonely, bored, bullied, or educationally underserved. The holes and layers of personal circumstance can grow when we chronically neglect the needs of students and fail to meet their needs over time. The effects of community layers can run even deeper, as individual communities may have increasing issues with problems like drugs, gangs, street violence, access to weapons. These types of activities can bleed into school communities and contribute to increases in school-based crime. But the conditions in communities themselves can have an effect. A community's size, its demographic and socioeconomic conditions, its political culture and climate, all of these things can influence the resources but also capacity that exists to begin to fill these holes at local levels. Then, if a violent act were to occur at school, using this model would require us to work backward through all these layers to understand which holes align and exactly how deeply, to make sure that we could put in place those layers of intervention so that violent act could not occur again. But here's the problem. As it is now, all too often, in the aftermath of a violent event at school, our response goes back to these immediate layers only. Rather than consistently diving deep and thinking about where we may have failed in the months before and the years before, we focus on those final decisions, the responses of emergency personnel, the decisions about how to best provide physical defense. And when we stay on these immediate layers, the calls to action can become quite polarizing, if not politicized, because their scope is just too narrow. These are critical layers. We can't ignore them. They're part of the model, after all, and they are the final layers of defense against a violent act. But we can't refuse to go beyond them either, deeper into those layers of social, community, and personal circumstance that also play a role. Anybody playing a role in the prevention of school violence needs to think about all of these layers. The good news is that research is moving in this direction. Research has conceptualized violence, for example, as a layered pathway to a catastrophic outcome. The deepest layers of cause are personal grievances, so those psychosocial holes in layers of personal circumstance that can give way to the formation of violent ideations. The intermediate layers are stages of planning and thought, oftentimes where we begin to see outward signs for help manifesting. And the final layers, the final preparations for an attack and the final defenses that might stop it. The US Secret Service applied this model to analyze extreme acts of school violence. They found that these events do not just happen. Rather, they are the result of a lot of different individual and environmental circumstances compounding over time. They also found the majority of perpetrators informed somebody of their plans in advance, and that over 90% displayed one or more warning signs well in advance of the time they committed their violent crime. Research such as this shows that prevention is possible with a layered, systematized approach and should be supported by our leaders. A lot has been done, and a lot is being done, but a lot more is needed to really apply this way of thinking to its fullest potential. As a researcher at the Texas School Safety Center, I and other researchers and practitioners are working to apply this model in our capacity. We conduct regular security audits so that districts can become aware of vulnerabilities before conditions worsen. We host hundreds of training sessions per year to help educators learn how to better serve students and prevent violence before it happens. We evaluate different types of interventions and their impacts on different measures of school climate. But research and education is just one layer. Government leaders, decision makers, also need to commit to seeing this problem through this framework. With that, we might be able to work together to develop more systematized, objective ways to analyze a lot of different cases of extreme acts of school violence, much like the National Transportation Safety Board does with aviation accidents. With a centralized research board, we might be able to better understand the immediate and proximate causes of violence at school and better understand what layers of prevention to put in place universally, but also emphasize more locally. But just as the causes of school violence can run deep into the layers of personal and community circumstance, the solutions can too, which means that all of us building those community layers can also play a more preventative role. We can engage more with our surroundings and begin to see where those holes and layers of personal circumstances could be forming. We may engage with individuals who are suffering, depressed, lonely, maybe behaving in a way that isn't violent but might certainly seem distressing. And as we see those holes forming, we can engage and fill them with an ethics of care, giving each other food, supporting each other physically, being present emotionally. We can participate in local activities that add to that possibility for local capacity building. To do right by all of those playing a role in the prevention of school violence, all of us, community members, educators, researchers, government decision makers, leaders, must all commit to seeing this problem more comprehensively. And the more we understand this problem comprehensively, the more we can understand the multiple layers to block pathways to those catastrophic outcomes that we all so hope stop happening. We can commit to making school violence a lot more like aviation accidents, occurring incredibly rarely and prevented through incredibly layered systems of intervention, layered like cheese.